So I'll start by welcoming you to the channel. In fact, I think this is the first time, isn't it?
Yes, I've never been on your channel. No.
There you go. So welcome to the
Only for-
channel. And what's been going on? Why don't we start there with your life, with what you're doing?
Okay, quick recap so you can understand all these things that are around me. Lots of crystals, lots of stuff. I started out as a tarot reader, and I was gifted with the knowledge of who I was very young. So I've been reading tarot since I was 12,
Mm,
and then you kind of played around with it, kid stuff, and then I went to college. And when I was in college, I found out that I could do remote viewing. I didn't know what it was called, but I lost a roommate over it because I described the inside of her house, and she said, "Well, anybody could figure that out. I mean, if you come, yeah, I've never been to Memphis. I don't know how she'd think I would know where out." So, and then I kept telling her, though, you have that beautiful portrait of your mother over the fireplace. And she said, "Well, now I know you're wrong. You just realize you're wrong. There's no portrait of my mother over the fireplace." Well, when she went home at Thanksgiving, her mother had had a beautiful formal portrait done of her when she was running some big society thing in Memphis in this beautiful blue dress. And when she came back, she said, "I've already asked to have a roommate change." And
that's good. That's a
I'd
good
been
one.
fortunate to be raised in a place where my friends all looked at me like I was crazy, but they didn't reject me. That's the first time somebody just said, "You're crazy. I'm getting the hell out of here." So then growing up, going through my adult years, growing into those, I'd go in and out of what we do. And along the way, I did a lot of tarot, studied numerology, studied astrology, which I totally admire people who can do astrology. I took a year-long course in it, and I know just enough to know I'm dangerous if I try. Uh, and then I went into broadcasting. I got a master's in business. I have a master's in accounting and computer science, besides a master's in broadcasting. And then I ran several different companies. Then I worked in politics, which is why I don't read politics. So if you want to come to a channel and just hear talk about the greater spiritual movements going on around us, come visit Nancy Jean's garden, because that's where we do that. And then when I got out of politics, I was offered a job at a wine bar where they said, "Would you like to come read here on Tuesdays?" And I said, "Sure." And it was kind of the perfect gig. I was retired at that point. I just had my knees replaced, and I really didn't want anything more strenuous. So I did that, and then I ended up reading also in a vintage clothing store. And I did that for about 6 years, and then COVID came
Mm,
and closed that all down.
mm.
And actually, COVID, my guides pulled me out of the world in early February of 2020. I was driving home from the wine bar, and I was stone cold sober, guys. I was just driving down this big highway freeway in Dallas, and I was doing 80 miles an hour, which is my typical little old lady in the car speed. And I all of a sudden my entire car was encased in this gray grit. And I said, "Okay, what's this?" Because I knew if that happens, they're there. They're going to come talk to me. And they said, "You're going home." And I said, "Yeah, I know I'm going home. And I'd like to make it home. I'd like to be able to see the road. And they said, "Oh, it's okay. We're going to keep you clear. You're going to get there." And they said, "But you're really going home?" And I said, "I know I'm going home. It's 11 o'clock at night. And they said, "No, no, you're going home and you're not leaving till we tell you." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, you've heard about it. What's going to be in the air could kill you. I had very bad asthma at the time." They said, "It will compromise you. You cannot get this. You have to go home and hide." So I came home, and I was sharing my condo at that time with two of my kids, and they woke them up the next day. And I said, "Well, I've been told that I'm coming home." And they went, "Why?" And they said, "Not that silly flu stuff they think is coming." And I said, "Apparently they don't think it's silly." So
Mm.
I went home and locked the door, and I didn't walk out until May of 2020. I went for a walk in the park that was behind my house.
Mm.
So
Wow. 2020. That was so
Yeah.
that was the year of the pandemic. So you
Yeah,
did.
they closed, the whole world closed in the US on the 13th of March because it's also my oldest son's birthday.
Mm.
And they were having a very small party where he said it was the world's weirdest birthday party. They were all looking at each other like, do you have it? Do you have it? And but it really hadn't hit yet. Although people were starting to die in New York and stuff at that point. But so I came home and just hung out, and then slowly I've branched out a little bit.
Mm.
And that got me into doing YouTube and meeting a lot of people. But I also had begun right before COVID started. I really began working with crystals and learning how to put them into shape and form and using sacred geometry and numerology to do it. Now, this is what it eventually grew to. I build crystal grids, and I've got one I'll show you. This is a grid. And this was unpretentiously, I was talking with a ley line energy worker from who's also a house cleanser in England, and he said, "Why don't you build a grid for the world?" And I went, "That's not pretentious at all. I'm going to build a grid for the world." So I mentioned to some of the readers, and I said, "Oh, we'll all go in with you." So this was a combination of about 4 of us putting our heads together and using my system. And each stone, when you get a grid, each stone has what the stones are there for, where it is on the thing, what it means for you, and how to use it.
Right.
And they're like a little power generator that kind of sits in the back and hums. So on New Year's last year, 4 of us got together and fired it up with the guy in England, 6 o'clock our time, midnight where he was. And so I build those, and I also have created. This is a heart chakra egg, and this is throat chakra egg. This is for people who want to work with their throat chakra, learn how to communicate more effectively, and clear that up. And the other one I've done so far is this is a heart chakra egg.
Oh, nice.
And that one I invented the heart one first for a friend of mine who's died twice on the on the hospital table working on his heart. And he's came back both times. Not real happy about coming back, but he's here. Just talked to him today. He's still around. And he wanted me to find something that was more focused on that for him than a grid. And so I invented that, and that's what you'll find out if you watch me do the 9 candles. I include crystals in that too, but it's a way to help us all focus our intentions on certain things so that we can act more as a large group. Because I think the more of us that bond our spiritual energy together, the more important and the more quickly we can make the changes that are being foretold that are going to come around Lionsgate this year, 8/8, which is the 8th of August.
8th of August. So what changes are those? What are you referring
Well,
to?
right now, 8/8 Lionsgate, it's actually a whole season. It starts about the 24th of July and goes until the 7th or 8th of August. I mean, no, it goes until like 12th of August. But it's a period of time when the star Sirius, which we're up in your world here, the star Sirius, the Earth, and the constellation of Orion are all lined up. And they're lined up in such a way that that's exactly what the pyramids in Giza were lined up to when they were originally built. And it's supposedly a time of year when great and sudden transitions happen. And it's a time, in the last few years, psychics who've been dealing with not just signs, symbols, stars, and things, but just getting energy patterns, that our energetics are changing. We're changing from being our human form, our earthbound form. It's got a lot to do with the ascension, how people feel like their energies are changing. A lot of people are finding that thought they were a little bit psychic, or finding out they're a whole lot psychic. And if they're a whole lot psychic, they're like blown open. And a lot of that shifting happens during the season of Lionsgate. And 8, and numerically, numerology, 8 and 8 are powerful numbers because they're money power concepts and bringing that forward. And this year's 887, seven is 2023 works itself out to be a seven. But next year we're going to be an 888 Lionsgate a year from now. So that's going to be all kinds of fun.
Right in the thick of the election mayhem. We're gonna
Oh,
have
yeah.
that.
Well, a perfect time for it. The other things that have happened on 8/8 was a year ago. That's when they went in and served the search warrant on Mar-a-Lago.
Was that an
And
88? That was it.
that was on August 8th.
Oh yeah,
And,
right.
and, and in 1972, Nixon resigned on August 8th.
Huh. It's so interesting. Yeah, I mean eight is normally nine is associated with more of a completion thing, but eight is an infinity symbol, so eight has to be powerful as well.
It's a powerful time when things that are happening there are really happening there. I mean, they're not going to have, I don't think anybody's really, if they go back in their life, they're not going to find too many dull 8/8s in their lives.
Yeah, it's curious that this year the because the Sirius proximity, I'm pretty sure that has to do with the being on the same side as the Earth or something along the lines. Because Sirius is in Cancer, around close to the middle of Cancer, but this year Venus is retrograding in Leo around this same period. It's going to start to retrograde very soon, and the early August period is just starting its retrograde cycle. The curious thing about that is that Venus does 8-year cycles. Its cycles are
Yes.
such that wherever it starts, if you look at the ephemeris point for that day, it keeps shifting for 7 years. But in the 8th year, it's back to where it was. After tracing a pentagram in the sky, it kind of goes through
Right.
this thing, then it returns. And so I think that adds another layer of meaning because Venus retrograde periods too are for society. You get periods where people are restless and they push back against the consensus. For example, I think this thing with the actors union and the all these strikes that you're getting are
Right.
Venus retrograde, with people saying we're fed up and we're not going to agree to these rules anymore, and so we're in that. Plus what you're bringing up as well, because that's a different layer there. You're getting into the the mystical dimension, I think, unless you want to wrap in the
No. I know. But one of the things I've been listening to there's some channelers who channel from the folks way up out there somewhere. And I was listening to one today, and what she was describing is we're all beginning to feel like we're getting stuck in the Instapot. And we're going to get heated up and we're going to come out changed one way or the other. And I was wondering if, I don't know how to put it another way, but are there any great movements within the stars other than Venus that you just mentioned? Are there any other things that are pushing us into feeling like we're all stepping into the Instapot and we're going to have to see what we come out at the end?
well, it depends how long you're pointing to. If you say now, this August, September, then probably the Venus is a more dominant pattern because that's when it's happening. If you're talking about the decade we're in, we are on the cusp of major changes because multiple planets are changing signs all at the same time. Like Neptune will change after being in Pisces since 2011. It's changing in 2025. Saturn goes in there with it at the same time. Pluto is making its way into Aquarius permanently. It's been in Capricorn since 2008. Will be in Aquarius till 2042. That's a major change.
Yeah.
And Uranus, which is another big mover, that takes a little longer, but it also in the middle of the decade switches signs too. So there's a lot going on around major energy shifts, and those are real, absolutely, because
Oh,
you
yeah.
see, you see entire social movements, uh, and things changing in major ways. The Neptune in Pisces, for example, is on the plus side why there is so much great information in mediums like YouTube, but it's also why there's a lot of disinformation, and you get the threat of AI and fakes and all of that. That's the dark side of Neptune, right? And
Oh, yeah. You get the flip side of every coin.
Yeah, it's almost like the universe is like a coin. It's very difficult to not
Hmm.
get the two things. So, but yeah, long story short, it does fit in the near and upcoming terms. Both, yeah, both would point in that direction for sure.
Yeah, I got an email today from a client who I built her a grid, and she was a little disconcerted when she pulled friendship. I have a series of cards you can pull from, and that's where we get the vibration from. And she was like, "How blah friendship?" And she thought, nothing's happening around my friendships. I'm just drifting along having my friendships. It ends up she got in a slugfest. She didn't hit back, but this woman approached her and said, "Well, I'm so grateful that I think she was RFK Jr. Is running because it gives us someone to really vote for." And this woman said, she said, and the woman who got my grid said, she said, "I wouldn't vote for him." And she said, "This is a woman who used to be sane." And she said, this woman looked at her and she said, why are you saying that? What do you know? And she said, so she just told her a few things that made him seem less than altogether to her. And the woman slapped her and knocked her down in the middle of a public parking lot.
Oh, wow. There you go.
And so she went home and she looked at the grid and she said she hadn't fired it up yet. She said, so I'm going to have a call with her tomorrow, talk to her about it. But yeah, it may be time for her to start really seeing who her friends are. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a classic. It's in astrology that would be the 11th sign, but that can be a friend or just a social contact because.
mhm.
But yeah, same thing.
Well,
Where
she said someone she'd known 20 years and would never have expected that behavior from her. And one of the things I've been getting from a lot of looking at all the different pieces that are supposedly forming this is that a lot of people are going to find out a lot more who people really are. The facades are starting to fall off, and their real energy that they're based in is going to come, and they're going to see what they feel like, what they're doing. And that was of all the stories I've gotten recently, that was the one that told me the most completely. And I think if everybody understands we're all in a lot of change, maybe we can have some more compassion for others we see in change who are not doing it as well as we would like, and also to have some compassion for ourselves because I'm 74 years old and I'm like, what do you mean we're going to go through another major change? What the, you know, I
I
did the
know,
60s, I didn't want to do that again.
wanted to stop. Yeah, yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Stop the train. I want to get off.
yeah. Although, I mean, if you look around at the current energies, it's not sustainable. It has to change because
Oh, yeah.
it's too tense the way it is, and it's just too disjointed and too out of sorts. So I think it's a welcome thing that
Oh, I'm glad to see. I think I'm going to like the political changes at the end of it all. Now, mind you, I ran a huge field program for Obama. So, much of what's happened in the last couple of years have been very distressing. But, I realized that it took us a long time to get to the point where we could get him, and it's going to take a while to work out the balance because he was a huge shift and change when he came in.
yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, there was a rebound effect to
Hmm.
to a figure like Trump. Although that also to me was, you know, it was really disappointing the way Democrats they don't take elections seriously enough. Because it's elections. You have to win big. You can't just say we're going to win and there's no need to vote. That's always a mistake
Hmm.
because the size of your win is your mandate. So you have to be very disciplined. And I remember seeing numbers with that 2016 vote that were really disturbing because Trump is only there because Democrats didn't vote when all is said and done. And
Well, people who didn't see who Trump was didn't vote. I was that year. It was one of the last years I was doing much of anything, and in where I live, you can be a deputy registrar, and I could carry voter registration forms and teach people how to fill them out, and then get them to the county seats so they get on the voter rolls. And I had a big pile of them where I was reading Tarot, and I talked to people about how important voting was. I talked to everybody about that because I I can't imagine not voting. My kids were raised so crazy about voting that my son was driving through Dallas on, it was the last day of a primary, and he made the carload of college kids he was with stop at the polling place he knew would be open on Sunday so he could go vote early. And he got out of the car and ran in and voted, and then ran back out, and he called me that night and he said, I voted. Don't worry about it. I got anything. I mean, my kids, I think they always thought they wouldn't get fed if they didn't vote, but I wouldn't have been that mean. But in 2016, it destroyed me the night that they declared Trump was going to win. I was working at the wine bar because it was Tuesday night, and they said, "Oh, he can't be winning. Read the cards." And the cards were not turning out terribly well. And finally, I decided I'd do a big spread. I normally do 1, 3, 5, 10 card readings. I don't do massive, but I did a massive spread. And two of the servers and the sommeliers there came up and they said, "You look really sick." And I said, "I'm not sure I can believe this." And I saw the whole thing. I saw the whole 4 years. I saw kids in cages. I saw trying to abolish civil rights. I saw Supreme Court judges being traded around like baseball cards. And I was devastated. And I mean, I'd been working my whole adult life to not have this kind of nightmare. So I was so upset with that. And I never wanted that deck to be read again together. I mean, it was so evil. It just was evil to me. And so I took a third of the deck and threw it in the dumpster at the wine bar, a third of the deck and threw it on a gas station on my way home, and put the other third in the dumpster where I lived. And I just crawled into bed for 2 days. And finally, my daughter came in and said, "Mom, you got to get up. I mean, you can't lay here for 4 years. It's not going to work." So I got up, and what really upset me was only 48% of the eligible voters in the country voted overall. So, I mean, 52% of the people in this country was like, and I would hear this from people all the time, "Well, I just think politics is so nasty. And I just don't want to make a wrong decision." Well, the only wrong decision you can make is to not vote. I don't really care which side you vote for. And when I was back at the clothing shop, and one of the clerks came up and she said, "Boy, you must really be pissed at all those people who voted for Trump." I said, "No, I'm more pissed at the 52% who didn't take their role as a citizen in this country seriously." And I said, "And they're going to see what happens when you don't." And I really feel that in my heart of hearts. I've worked so hard on GOTV, Get Out the Vote, and all those kinds of movements that I just was, anyway, it's getting my blood pressure up. It's not a good thing. But and it really, I'll tell you, this sums it up for me. I was raised in a very political household, politically the opposite of where I am now. My parents were Republicans, but they were during Eisenhower's era and that stuff.
Right.
My mom, she used to say she was a Rockefeller Republican. But my mom was a little old, sweet Episcopalian church-going lady. And people would come up to her and they'd say, "Helen, why do you sully your hands in politics?" And she'd look right back in the eye and say, "I'd rather sully my hand in politics than have them sully their hands on me." And what we've had is 4 years of being sullied. So
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And, it's true. And it's true about the number of the percentage. And it's also true that there are millions of people that voted for Obama didn't vote for Hillary. And that's just incomprehensible to me. I don't understand how you can't compute, where you live, what it means, and things like, oh, it's the same two-party. No, they're not the same at all. They were not the same, for example, in 2000 when all these really smart Democratic Floridians voted for Ralph Nader, handing the election to George Bush because they ended up arguing over 500 votes and 90,000 votes went to Nader. I mean, this is knuckle-headed thinking where you have to, assess where you are so you can make the right decision.
It's a Jill Stein thing. In all the states where she ran really hard and actively, if her voters had not voted for Stein, if they'd stayed home
Right.
or not voted for Stein or come over and voted for Hillary because they really didn't like Trump that much, we would have won.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just anyway. It's a big game of numbers, and unfortunately, I convinced my oldest child he really likes it, so that's what he works in, and he's working in the next round of elections. So I
Yeah.
still
That's
get to
good.
hear about what's going on,
That's
but
good.
it's and there are some really good people, and there's some good younger people. He's in his 40s, and there's some. He said, "Man, you get a hold of some of these 20-year-olds, and they're so ready to go, and they so understand the system better than." He said, I had you, but he said, these kids just walk out of nowhere,
Mm.
know what to do. So I'm encouraged. I think it's going to work out well.
Yeah, and then the generations coming in, the Gen Z, millennials, they're not
Hmm.
supporting this garbage at all. So it's their demographics that the GOP, the way they're making their plans, it's pretty short-sighted. But everything is 24-hour news cycle. Let's get the next win and so forth. So right now we're all focused on next year because it's critical, especially with this idiot who just we can't get rid of this guy. Although it's looking pretty grim, thankfully, as the days pass. So
His days are getting long. His days are getting longer if you're living with his soul, but shorter towards the end he wants. So
yeah, no, exactly. So you're hopeful that way too. I know you said you're not doing this. You're not doing political readings yourself.
I don't do, well, okay. I do political readings every Sunday morning. I'm on a show called Spiritual Essence, and I read with Scott Allen. And it's an
Oh,
open forum, and people can ask anything. And that's
okay.
where I get to vent. That's where I get to vent my political spleen. But
Oh,
the payoff of that is a lot. When I first started reading in 2020 on YouTube, there are a lot of political readers, and they kept saying, "Oh, if you don't read politics, you'll never make it." And I said, "I got a lot of other tools in my basket. Thank you."
mm,
But what makes I became the go-to person. If they didn't understand a political concept, they could come to me and I could explain it to them because I've done everything up to congressional candidates and I know all the paperwork that ought to be filed. I know that it's all screwed up right now and nothing's getting filed like it should on a certain from a certain party's perspective. But um, I so I watch it, but and then Scott had some other people reading with him and they had to back out because they decided they wanted to have a Sunday morning. And so he and I got to talking and I said, yeah, I'll come on and help you. Um, but I also make them sit through at least one part of every one of those Sunday mornings is how can you get involved? What's going on in your state? Where are the primaries going to be heating up? Where do you need to know about how to sign up for this or that? And I answer a lot of questions because a lot of people would love to get involved with politics. They just don't know how.
mm,
And I always say, find a cause you really like, see where and it doesn't have to be on a national level. I've run school board members, I've run city council people, I've run county people. And there's a lot more, your day to day life is going to be ruled by the close in politicians. And those are the ones sometimes people don't pay attention to. And they ought to, because your roads aren't going to get fixed if you get a real crook in there. I can guarantee you. I've lived in parts of the city where that happened.
right, 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 right. No, it makes a lot of sense. We're going through that in our North Seattle here, where the transit system people they're trying to muscle through something that looks pretty clearly like someone is making money from it, but it doesn't look like the appropriate plan. It's costing a lot of
Hmm.
money and creating a lot of uh, destruction of the environment and so forth. And if
Hmm.
you're not in there early enough to fight them, then now apparently it's 90% of the way through and it's in a sense unstoppable. But I didn't know about it. And so then how do you advocate if
You don't know. And
they're
we
working in the
used to always,
background?
right, we used to always say if they're voting on it in city council, you're way too late. They're going to do something to your neighborhood you may not want done to it. And um, so I got to know what was going on in city council. I just hang around and find out. And
Mm.
then that eventually led to me running candidates because I got to know enough about what's going on. But if you don't get in where things are being planned, and a lot of people say, well, I don't have time for that. Well, then you can't complain because somebody had time to do it.
Yeah, no, and then you live with it too. That's the problem.
Hmm.
It's like the same logic as the national election. When you look back, if you look back at the last couple of decades, I've said this many times, all these judges wouldn't be there, but for what happened in those two elections that should not have been lost. That's what led
Hmm.
to Alito and Roberts and Gorsuch and all these people that now you people say, oh, these people are horrible. Well, in a way, you put them there by not considering the situation as it really is. Instead of
Right.
becoming too idealistic or too
And
lazy.
we've been running a 40-year, the Democrats have been running a 40-year race against a group of people that were obsessed with the court. I mean, that was their one and only issue. Because I used to run into it all the time with Republicans. And I live in a place many people are probably familiar with. It's a state called Texas. And yeah,
It's a state called Texas, is it?
yes. And you
It's
get,
also known
and
as Abbott Land.
oh God, it's horrible. I mean, this week I lost it over stuff that's going on the border. And I mean, we've had miserable things happening on the border, but what Abbott's voting for right now. The only thing is, I have two close-in friends who are very psychic. You'll never find them on YouTube. They don't live in that world. But I was talking to one of them today, and he said, "I finally saw Abbott in jail clothes." He said, "I had a snappy little vision one night." And he said, "Do you think it could happen?" And I said, and he doesn't have snappy little visions without there being a lot of something behind it. And I think some of the stuff they're doing on the border right now with the state troops are going to blow it up for him. I mean, I go door to door. I ran field programs, and Texas is really a blue state. They just haven't run candidates. We would have so many areas where people weren't running Democratic candidates, and they go, "Oh, well, they've got it all tied up." Well, how are you ever going to know? And it's like we had the first real primary we had was in '08 when Hillary and Obama came in. And there's a county that is so close to me that if I sneeze too hard in my rolly chair, I'll blow myself into the county just north of me. And it was a blood red county. But they'd never had a primary, so who knew? And we don't have, do you have party registration in your state?
I don't think so. I know we
Okay.
have voter registration, but I'm not aware of ever being.
Okay. Well, they have, some states you have to say you're Republican or
Right,
Democrat or
right.
whatever.
Yeah, I don't think we
Well,
have that
we
here.
don't have any of that. The only way you know who someone is to look at their voting records and see which primary they voted in.
Right.
And so this area north of me had a couple candidates who were talking to me about running for different races. And I said, well, let's look at the numbers. This county has millions of people in it, right? It had 1,500 identifiable Democrats because it had so few races where you could figure, so how do you know where they are? Well, then in comes Hillary and Obama, and they went from 1,500 to 150,000.
Wow, look at that. So they're
I
there.
mean, and we kept saying, if y'all just run somebody so we can get some numbers or, work harder. And that county now has split it's, how do you elect your like city council people by, they have a certain area that they're over, or do you have like 9 spaces and you vote on all 9 of them?
I'm pretty sure it's a district thing, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I know
Most
that.
places are.
Yeah.
Actually, it's mostly in the South where they wanted to keep tight control that they kept it. Well, Dallas has individual districts, but the county just north of me, they have 9 districts, and everybody gets to vote on all 9 of them. So in essence, there's 3 big chunks of that city that run the whole thing. Well, something's happening because the last race they had some bona fide. Of course, they're nonpartisan, so they don't have an R or D beside their name. But if you listen to what they said they wanted to do, they elected 3 Ds, 3 solid Ds. So it's changing, but people are like, but it doesn't change fast enough. Yeah, but it doesn't change at all if you don't keep watching it.
That's true. And also, that when did this happen? These three Ds? Was that
This year,
yeah, because
we
those tend to be when you see places like Texas, or I heard of there was a mayoral race in Florida, unexpected D win.
Jacksonville.
Yeah, exactly. Those tell you that the 24 election is in grave peril for the GOP, and it's just the way it is. Like the small races point to the way things tend to
Right.
fall. So this, to me, this gives me hope, but it always depends on people being on top of it and realizing this is serious. You know, maybe
Well,
this era will be that all this pain that we've experienced and all this distress from having an evil clown running
hmm
things will make people more civically minded and cause them to be on top of it and vote more and hopefully train their children to be like that from a young age because now they're like my niece is I think in her early 20s and
hmm
she says, what do you mean they took this away? How can this be? How can this happen? And you have to say to her, well, if you don't vote, I mean, it can happen to you, it can happen to anyone.
Well, and after '08, my youngest son had gotten married, and his wife was a rising young executive in a bank. And when she first entered our household, she was a daughter of a military family and was very conservative. And all she did was hang around with us, and she changed. And so she said she works with a lot of people. She said they don't understand, they don't hear it. So I went to lunch with her and six other young women, and I explained to them that they were all about 26, 27 years old, that when I was their age, I couldn't get a credit card without my husband's signature or my father's signature, even though I was the one that made all the money in my first marriage. So, and I was explaining to them that when I'd worked, Texas actually has its own ERA amendment that did pass, it's statewide. Because when I was in my early 20s, there were women whose husbands were missing in action in Vietnam and they couldn't sell their houses.
Wow.
If I mean, they're absolutely trapped by their circumstances. And we would work with lawyers to try and help them wend their way through and get their lives back in shape. And when I got divorced, because like I said, in my first marriage, I made all the money. Um, uh,
Yeah, right, exactly. Tell
yeah,
the truth as it is.
well, why are you here? Anyway, when we got divorced, he got our credit rating. I had nothing.
Yeah, it's historical
And
though, because you can go back and women were allowed to vote only starting a century ago, and
mhm,
and because of momentum. This is the thing about when there's a habit, it doesn't change that quickly. So if you look at the record, they only started voting for themselves in the 80s, and that's when the
mhm.
Democratic Party started to outvote the GOP because women are more sensible than men. I hate this is the truth.
Yeah, well, it's true.
Right.
Well,
Well,
they care about the future and they're what the world their children grow up in.
yeah.
But the other thing that um, happens with a lot this I used to run the polls. I'd work and run, where people bring the, which I really pisses me off about what they did in the last election to some of these people. But anyway, I would run the polls and I'd, help people, vote and learn how to vote. And one of the things is only one person can be in the
The booth.
spot at a time, right?
Right.
We used to have a lot of these older men, and when I mean older, these guys would be about 100 now. They would be standing behind their wives, who were equally about 100 now, and they would tell them,
Well, how to vote.
I mean, they would sit there and watch how they voted to make sure they voted the way they wanted to. And so the wife, when I started to run the polls, I said I would split the booths up so they couldn't even be beside each other, right? And if a man tried to interfere with his wife voting, I'd say, "Sir, you have to come over here." Well, no, I need to be. I said, "No." I said, "Ma'am, do you need help voting? Because I can help you." And she said, "No, I don't need any help voting." So then I'd make them, and I actually threw some of them out of the polling place. I said, "You can wait for her outside." I mean, I don't care what kind of problem I cause, but if anybody was going to interfere, and all the women would walk by my desk mouthing "Thank you." And one time when I was running um, canvassing, where they were going door to door and saying, "I'm representing," they knocked on this guy's door, and the husband answered. And he said, "Well, I don't know why you Democrats would even come to my door. No one in this house has ever voted for a Democrat." And you could see the guy who was at the door could see the wife behind him going, "Go, get out of here, go."
Yeah, it's funny. I know, yeah, it's remarkable. I've heard of those stories even from the recent election of husband and wife voting Trump and not Trump, and I'm thinking, you know, it's like George Conway and Kellyanne Conway. I kept thinking, how long can that marriage last? And the amazing thing was that it was her daughter who was
Hmm.
really young when Trump came in, but as she became more of a teenager, turned
Hmm.
completely against her mother and was taking pictures
Hmm.
or compromising things and so forth. But you wonder how households like that survive when you've got, you know, this is no longer about even George H.W. Bush, or well, him especially, but George W. Bush seems pretty normal compared to what's been going on in the Republican Party in recent years. There's just no place to meet. It's too extreme, you know, too much. So
Well,
it's
when right after Hillary lost, um, I had a lot of women because this vintage clothing store I was in, it was kind of a high end. They sold antique cowboy boots and really good recycled jewelry and stuff. And I had some women that used to come and get read relatively frequently. And I can't tell you the number that said it's done. My marriage is over. You know, he was once one woman said he was
wow.
an she said he was an uncompromising a-hole. But you know, we like the country club and we grew up together and everything. She said, not after this. Now he thinks he can tell me how to do everything. I mean, I really saw a lot of divorces out of
Yeah, see that's the thing. That's the amazing thing. You put a person in charge, people underestimate the effect it has on the citizens. It's as though he's giving
it.
you
Hmm.
permission. You know, the Trump thing was the era of the alpha male is back, you know, which by the way, in terms of the planets is the total opposite. It's impossible to resist the rise of women and a number of other groups that have been left behind. That's the whole discovery of Eris bumps Pluto off. Pluto is the ultra male bad boy
Hmm.
behavior, and this is the planet that says no. Now we're going to have a different system in here. You have to include
Isn't
more.
that when a lot of like Ceres and Eris and a lot of little planetoids that some astrologers follow, they all kind of hit our charts big time.
Yeah, well, of those, to me, Eris is the most significant because it's the one that effectively made for the demotion of Pluto, which you can't demote.
Hmm.
Astrologically, you can't demote, but it's the logic that it's concurrent with this rise of uh, female power, literally. And you know, this is one of the things Trump has accomplished. He's put more women in government, and you'll see even more going into the next
I
decade.
love I love Eris's myth. She was always a troublemaker. She was
Yeah,
Mars's sister, and Mars is a troublemaker. So what would you expect?
I know.
But she didn't get invited to that big wedding when they were gonna, and all the gods of Olympus were there. So she created a gold apple, and it said, "To the fairest one,"
Hmm.
and it got rolled in the middle of the floor. And of course, all the big goddesses were fighting over it because Greeks never let women have a whole lot of other than petty, as far as I'm concerned, in their myths.
Hmm.
But they were all out there fighting about it. And they said, no, Paris, you get to choose which one's the fairest. Now, you talk about an absolute no win situation. That poor baby didn't have a chance.
It's true. Yeah, no, it's true. It's a really interesting myth because it has, as myths can, a lot of layers of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the most uh, I don't know, the most wholesome way to look at it is, other than that, it's obviously a competition, and you see Iris in charts, you get cutthroat competition. Like you see
Mm-hmm.
it negatively in Trump, he
Mm-hmm.
competes. But for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger is an example of someone who used it to compete very effectively and become
Mm-hmm.
well known and so forth. And so one way to say it would be to compete with yourself in terms of improving yourself. That's a good use
Mm-hmm.
of it. The other is that with the three goddesses, Pallas Athena, Juno, and Aphrodite, they're
Mm-hmm.
the impulses to there's the love impulse, the wisdom impulse, and the status impulse.
Mm-hmm.
Those tend to be three competing things in a person's life. And the idea is to balance the three. It's a triangle that if you can get
Mm-hmm.
those three more or less equally or close to it, your life goes well. But if something is missing, then it's more difficult, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that to me is the better way to look at it. Otherwise, you just say, "Oh, that's the goddess of discord," and that planet, all it does is cause problems, which isn't
Yeah.
exactly true.
Well, and then they play into it. I mean, the gods and goddesses always got in each other's games. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too.
But we are heading, we're, my feeling is we had the divine feminine period, and then we had the masculine period in which we're coming out of.
Mhm.
And my impression is that we're going into a period of people just being human. And I think a lot of that's reflected in the younger generation saying, we don't like your pronouns. I don't like being defined in that small of a space. I want to be able to have all, because I've always believed all human sexuality is on a spectrum and we all have different parts of it, all in different places. But I think some of the younger people, say 35 and under, that are really part of the what we adults arrogantly call pronoun wars. It's not really. They just want to define who they are.
Mhm.
Um, that I think that that's a sign for those of us who are old like me and don't want to have to rethink all that. So what if I have to rethink it? Why should I put them in a box that I didn't like? I never liked living in the box of what I was supposed to be as a young woman.
Mhm.
Um, my parents had many stories about how I didn't like being in that box.
Yeah, that's you. That's planetary too, though, right? I mean, a person has
Oh
sometimes
yeah.
you're just born. You come into the world with a certain temperament, and even if your parents are a certain way, in a way, you could think of it as they have a subconscious aspect that you manifest for them. You show up
Hmm.
and they're really that way, or they could be that way, but it can be very unconscious to them.
Hmm.
It can be
Oh yeah.
threatening even
Well,
because if
and
they, yeah, yeah,
they were a
exactly.
totally different generation. I look at my grandchildren, and I really, really like them. But both my grandchildren were born after 2012, so they're part of that group of, some people call them starseed children and whatever. I just think that they really have some spectacular aspects to them.
Hmm.
My
Yeah.
kids have good aspects, but I have two Pisces and one Gemini. I couldn't get a single sign. They always have to be going up or down, or which one's coming in the room.
You have
We're
two
all,
you have two Pisces children and a Gemini?
uh-huh.
Yeah, well you have Pisces in the children's house, so there's that to explain. I mean
Yeah.
that's assuming the way I read it, because Scorpio rising, so your Pisces is five, and five
Yeah.
is children. The Gemini, that's a little different. That the Gemini is your eighth. Is that the deep child, or is not
That's my
necessarily?
middle child.
It,
It's
it,
my Casey, my daughter.
Well, Gemini, very different than Pisces, but I'm wondering because it's in your eighth, is the middle child, the Gemini, the more interested in mysticism or not necessarily? Is that true? Well, that would be the eighth sign. Yeah, there you go. So even though it's Gemini, goes to show you that's a good Gemini versus all the Geminis that are populating the political sphere these days.
Oh God, she was always like, "Do I have to be?" And then I found out yesterday Marjorie Taylor Greene is a Gemini,
Yeah,
and
no,
I'm,
Marjorie Taylor Greene, Bill Barr, Trump, Giuliani. It's pretty scary, right? But
but
it's the logic that a lot of politics is talking and messaging. And so Gemini always thinks they can talk their way into things and out of things. So
mm-hmm,
politics is very appealing to them, but not when they go corrupt. Then it's a real problem.
mm-hmm.
It's a real problem. Yeah.
No, and especially she's got Virgo rising, so she loves details. So she
Mm,
just goes off and does that by herself. But she was one of my best in working on campaigns. She was the best right hand man for
mm.
me. Could just go do what I needed done and could put on whatever face she needed to get past how the people were.
Well, if she's Virgo rising, her Gemini is in the tenth in the house of career. That almost always gives you that knack, even from a young age, of
Mhm.
being in the mix and being out there. It's literally tenth is political power. People like that nearly always end up being the boss. When they're not the boss, they resent the boss because they want to be the boss. So the thing is, own that sun and be the boss because
Mhm.
you're meant to be the one in charge.
Well,
Hopefully in
she's
a
she's
benign way.
always she's always found jobs that she was the first person who ever had them. She got to completely define them, and she got to completely define how the job went. And it wasn't until she ran up against someone who didn't understand that, wouldn't give her the freedom to do it, that's where she's had problems. But I had similar problems with bosses too. So I just don't have bosses. I just kept employing myself.
Yeah, that's it. That's the solution. if you don't want bosses, be your own boss. So, what do you want people to know about what you do? Because I was very impressed with the tarot reading you did for me a few
Okay,
months
I
back.
do.
That was really cool. I still look at it, and the way things have turned out and so forth, and upcoming
Working out that
months.
way a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I I do normal readings, I do regular readings. If you go to my website, which is not Nancy Jean Scarden, that's my show. My website is Crystal Directions with an S.com. And you can go in the shop and it shows all kinds of readings I do. When I did a reading for Andre, I every year in December and January I do 12-month readings, and I lay the cards out, and then we start looking at the patterns we see for the year, and we plot out and kind of see where things are going for you. Um, it's the 20th of July, so you can get it until the end of this month because that would be 6 months to December. I do 6-month readings
6 month
in this
readings.
half the year. I I tried for a long time to figure out a way to lay them out. And when I start in odd months, I get the months all mixed up. And,
Mm.
I'm old. I do the patterns I do. So if you get on my site, you can find me and you can book a 6-month reading. And I also do traditional readings, like sort of somewhat predictive or situational. I also do past life readings. And when I do a past life reading, I have a quick way of sort of zoning in on a past life. I also have a pendulum garden that I can swing and figure things out for you. And then I do a much longer, I do a 4x4 of that life, the one that we're looking at from the past. And people who have had that um, over the years have said they learned a whole lot. It's like when you learn about a past life, you go, that's why I always thought that. Oh, no wonder,
Right, right.
it has that kind of effect on you.
It gives you insight
It
and
gives you
potentially.
insight. And, you know, um, I have someone she got hung, not just once, but when I said, did she get hung? It went really crazy. And I went, oh my God, kid, you spent your life trying to get hung. So, she could never wear scarves or necklaces. And once I got it and I wore it and said, okay, this is a scarf that's from now, that energy kind of dissipated and went away, and she could wear jewelry like that again.
She wasn't a Taurus, was she?
Yeah, she actually.
'Cause I mean, I know people laugh when but particularly non-believers, scientists, where they say, "Come on, the Aries is the head and the Taurus is the throat." It is. You see all kinds of examples.
It's where I had my worst problems all my life with health.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
all started in the throat.
yeah. It's totally true. And the signs, like the idea that I remember this. I like tennis, and I remember Andy Murray, who has Saturn in Sagittarius, and on his Saturn return, he had to do hip surgery because his hip was ruined, and Saturn tends to do that. And then his career effectively ended because he's
Mm-hmm.
come back, but he's lost too much. He's too old, and it's just a
Mm-hmm.
classic thing that you see applied to the sign, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
the wrong sign or Aries and a head thing or Pisces being the feet, things like that. They're dead
Mm-hmm.
on. Yeah. So
That's that's what well, I mean, and that's the kind of stuff I can do with cards. Um, and I use a variety of different kinds of cards. I also um, developed a pendulum grid to do, and I think that's really good for people because all of us, our vibrations are really changing, and sometimes we don't know what makes us go up or down. And so sometimes if you participate in an activity, like there was another reader, he and I we were meditating so we could get our vibrations up to 1,000, which is really good. That's
mm,
a really high level. And he went downstairs and he just happened to catch a news story that just made him crazy. So he ran upstairs immediately because he just checked himself 20 minutes before. He was 1,000. He checked his vibrations and he was down at 300, which is really pissed off. Um, so, and I teach people how to my goal is to try and teach people how to use the skills and the abilities and the simple tools I know to help themselves.
That's
And the
good. Yeah, yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Goes to that your Cancer moon in the ninth sign. Good for you. Yeah,
moon.
because that's the moon in its own sign, and it's the moon likes being there. So if you put it in a teaching house, it
Hmm.
shines. Yeah, that's really good.
The other thing about the moon being in Cancer is we really like food.
That's true. That's true. But like you said, there are two sides to every coin, right? That's always
Yeah,
with any sign. That's like with Jupiter is the most benefic planet, but it's an excessive planet and it doesn't like working. I noticed that if someone is on a Jupiter cycle, work is Saturn, right? But things don't happen without Saturn. They both have to get involved.
hmm,
Positive spirit, but work. Otherwise, it's things don't really
I
progress.
know. I've had Saturn on my butt for the last 2 years. I'm just so happy to see it sort of sliding off and kind of getting off directly, being on top of me.
Yeah, yeah, it was because you have three planets in Taurus, so it was working you over 21 and 22. But and then even in March, because you have an early Gemini Mercury, so early in March, and you have to be careful at the end of the year because Saturn is going to go through those early degrees,
Yeah, I know.
November, October, November, December. But
Hmm.
the thing about it is, though, once you know that it's there, as long as you realize, okay, it's there, you accept it, just
Hmm.
work on something that you know takes effort but will result in something good post that. And for
Hmm.
that, nothing like Saturn, because I notice I always get my best work done when Saturn puts pressure on me. I just get
Hmm.
down to it, and even if it means, I'll be thinking, I wish I were doing something else because this is just annoying, difficult. Doesn't matter. It becomes a really good thing. So yeah. Well, so it's been a pleasure speaking with
It's
you,
been
and
great talking with you.
I look forward to the next one. I know that I'm to meet with you for the candle ceremony,
9 candles.
nine
Yes.
candles.
Hmm.
Okay.
And
Right.
they're starting on the 29th. I have an intro show with Danny Shea, and we look at how the candles work. And the reason we started doing that was whenever I just spring up and have 9 candles, people go, "Oh, I didn't have time to get my candles and stuff." So it gives them kind of a day to get caught up.
Mm,
And then you potentially are on 8/1 or 8/2, August 1st or August 2nd.
okay.
It'll
August
be
1st,
taped.
August.
I run them as a premiere. It's at 7 o'clock on my channel, so people can dive in. They can chit chat if they want to watch it there. It's really one of the things I get a lot of people come over to see it, especially because we do it 9 days in a row. And if they're lighting candles with us, they get into putting up their intentions and sort of seeing who's in the community. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's
Excellent. Excellent. I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
okay. Well, I
So,
look forward.
everyone, I'm going to be putting Nancy's information in the description of the video. So, to get in touch with her, check out all those links for the
Hmm.
various things that she's doing. All right. That was great.
Okay. Well,
Bye,
thank you.
everyone.
Bye.